when you give birth in a hospital or you have a midwife, you kind of put your faith in them, right? So
Hmm.
even though you might feel that fear or have that fear in the back of your head a little bit, it's almost like you have this safety net of people. Well, they're
Hmm.
gonna say they're gonna keep me safe. Like it's all gonna be, I just need to push that fear to the back of my head. Whereas like free birth, it's just is a little bit more present, a little bit more of
Hmm.
like you don't have those other people to like put your faith and your trust into. And for me,
Yeah.
thankfully, I do have God, I do have my religion and everything, but it just with hospital and midwives, you can have this false sense of safety and security. Whereas
Yeah.
free birth, it's like, it's just this more present and like, okay, like sometimes things do happen. And it's, so I think it is, do as much work on yourself mentally as you can, because it is going to show up during your labor. And sometimes it can show up in really, not good ways. You can have your cervical lip that just doesn't release, or you can have certain things that just like hinder your labor because you have that fear that you haven't let go of.
Mhm. Hey, you're listening to Births at Home, the podcast, with me, Esmeralda, as your host. I am a mama of three, fellow home birther, doula, and birth keeper. I am completely obsessed with birth, more specifically, home birth. And this is the podcast where women come to share their home birth stories along with the journey that led them down the path to home birth. Whether you're pregnant, planning a home birth with your first or fourth baby, or even is just someone who is a complete birth nerd like me, this is the podcast for you. Let's get right into this week's home birth story.
I'm Alli. I live in Northern California. I have five kids, but one pregnancy was a twin pregnancy. So four pregnancies, two hospital births, two free births. And I'm a homeschooling mom. We have a little homestead. And yeah, that just is it in a nutshell.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And so, what kind of led you onto the journey of home birth? If you want to share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. So I had my first. I found out I was pregnant with him 5 days after I turned 18. So just a couple months out of high school, but all of high school, I was obsessed with birth, like home birth
Mhm.
specifically. My mom's mom was, I mean, they didn't use this term back then, but she was kind of crunchy, kind of maybe scrunchy. She went to have a home birth with my mom, and she actually has been like diagnosed a couple times where she really does have too small of a pelvis. So it
Mm.
did lead her to a C-section with my mom, and then she just went in for an elective C-section with my mom's brother. But that was kind of my mom's mindset. As she was very pro home birth, full breastfeeding, very minimal like medical intervention, I guess, just in life in general. And so that was kind of passed to my mom. And so she, although she had hospital births with us because that was just the societal norm, especially they didn't have social media to kind of normalize home births and everything. She always was very open about being supportive of home birth. And then we moved to Northern California from Southern California. And in the area that we live in, home birth is very common. And so she was able to like connect with others and kind of, just be open to this way of living even more. And
Mhm.
so when I was a teenager and stuff, she was very open about home birth, would always say that she wished that she could go back to home birth us. And then I was a gymnast. One of my coaches had a home birth. And so I would always follow these home birth accounts on Instagram. And I'd be like sitting on my phone at the end of class or whatever. And like something about home birth would pop up and I'd be like, oh shoot, like I need to scroll by real quick, or like other people are gonna see me like watching this baby be born and think I'm some weirdo. But so I would just always like, I loved the idea of birth. I loved watching birth, and I always thought that I would home birth. And then, just getting pregnant young and our living situation and everything, it didn't really work out with my first. And then having twins, you can't home birth with a licensed midwife with twins, at least in California. And I didn't know about free birth for, them at all. So I had those two hospital births. And then with my twins, I during their pregnancy, I was kind of open to the world of free birth. That was the first time I had heard the term at the end of the pregnancy with them. And so after having them, they were my first like fully like natural birth, no medicine or induction or epidural or anything. And my first thought after having them was like, whoa, I could have done that myself. Like, why did
Mm.
I not do that myself? It was just like my first time experiencing fetal ejection reflex and just all the things of like, I could have done that myself. And so
Mhm.
my twin birth, my second pregnancy was really what like brought me into free birth and to
Mhm.
finding that. And yeah, leading on to my two free births. But I was very like open to home birth and I really wanted home births with my first. I just, just our living situation and everything, and just the way it happened. I just went with the hospital and was hopeful that I could have a natural birth in the hospital. And I mean, it wasn't a horrible experience, but it definitely, you know, was just not exactly what I was thinking birth was.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. That's awesome to hear that. I feel like I have not heard anyone share a story similar to that of like
Okay.
growing up around home birth and just like
Yeah.
all these people in your life kind of were having home births and you were just
Mm-hmm.
exposed to it. So that's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. And then, yeah, definitely understandable getting pregnant young and really not having enough like resources to fully be like, I'm going to have a home birth right now. And even like with me, I got pregnant at I think it was 23 when I had my first. And even then, I felt like I didn't have the resources to have a home
Mm-hmm.
birth. So it's like just sometimes you're at a phase of life where it's not something you can kind of do. And so it is unfortunate, but it's just the way that things happen. And it doesn't sound like you had too bad of a hospital birth. So
No, it wasn't terrible. No.
yeah, that's awesome. Do you remember what was the thing that kind of made you see the free birth world? Like, was there a certain account you saw or a story you heard?
Yeah. So when I was pregnant with my twins, it was COVID time. So, my husband wasn't allowed to go to certain appointments and everything. So when I was 34 weeks, I was 4 centimeters dilated and I was having consistent contractions that they saw. So they kept me in the hospital for 2 days. And during those 2 days, my husband was allowed to come in, but my son wasn't. And he was 17, 18 months at the time. So, my husband was with me as much as he could be, but also we had our son. So I was kind of alone in the hospital for those 2 days, quite a bit,
Mm,
just kind of on my phone. And one of the home birth accounts, I don't remember the name of it, but the first time that I saw free birth, it was not necessarily in a positive way from this specific home birth account. It was this video of this mom. You might have seen it, but this mom was free birthing outside near her children's play structures, and she was standing up, and the baby, like, she didn't have her husband near her. The baby fell and the cord
mm,
snapped and stuff. It was kind of like not necessarily in like a positive way, but I mean, they weren't
yeah.
totally bad, but um, but that was the first time I saw the word free birth. And I was like, free birth,
Mm,
what is that? And so I looked it up and, saw the definition and you look it up. And I was just like, oh, I kind of want to know more about that. And
mhm,
so I looked up podcasts and I did find Free Birth Society, but I don't know why. I like think back to this. I'm like, why did I not look for them on Instagram? Like I didn't start listening to them when I was in the hospital. Then I just saw their podcast and I'm like
yeah.
looking back, why did I not? Like I totally could have like free birth the twins if I would have like just kind of dove in a little bit more. But
Yeah.
so that was the first time. And then after I had the twins and after just having, I think too, is I kind of had just leftover like light, slight trauma from my first hospital birth that I didn't have the full confidence. Like having the twins gave me that confidence of like, okay, no, I
Mhm,
can do this. Cause there were things with my first, I was like, can I even like birth again? Like,
mhm,
can I actually do that? Is that how it's going to be every time? But so after I had the twins and I kind of had that confidence of like, okay, I could totally do this, is when I went back to Free Birth Society. And I just listened to podcast after podcast after podcast and found them on
yeah.
Instagram. And then, kind of getting into that world more, I started finding other accounts. Eventually, you created your account. And,
Mhm,
I just found all of these other home birth accounts that I aligned with even more.
mhm,
And yeah, I think, just a couple months after having the twins, I knew if we were going to have another, that was the way that I was going to do it. And I just kept, just consuming the free birth content and just became, more educated, found resources to really, educate myself. And yeah, that was it was a kind of a couple month process of really getting to that point. But I'm glad I did before getting pregnant with my next, because when I did get pregnant with her, I just knew from the beginning, like wild pregnancy, free birth, that's what I'm doing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. Do you remember what kind of prep or research or anything like that you did either before you got pregnant with your third pregnancy or like right when you got pregnant? How was that kind of done?
Yeah. So before getting pregnant with her, it really was just the free birth stories. I love learning from others' experiences. And, the Free Birth Society, they have such a, variety of stories of, different variations of normal these women going through. And so I really just, before getting pregnant, I just really just listened to those. And then once I did find myself pregnant, I got Heather Baker's gosh, I can't remember the title, but it's a,
Home
the
birth,
home birth on
home
your own
birth on
terms.
your own terms.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I bought that and then kind of, read through that in like a day. And then I think that that was pretty much it. I kind of just pick and chose what I wanted to do as far as like my own prenatal care, which was really nothing. I felt, pretty healthy and didn't do much of like the urine tests or anything like that. But those are my two main resources that I would just go back to. The home birth on your own terms, it kind of had, I think it has like a section in there for like if things do go a little wonky, what you can do. And so I kind of liked that. But then, the free birth podcast, like there are women on there that had things go a little, out of normal and how they managed it and what they did. And so I learned really well from hearing others' actual
Mhm.
stories. And so it was
Yeah.
really just kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Was there any conversation that you had to have with like your partner about choosing free birth?
Um, I think because I kind of came to terms with like this is what I was going to be doing before I was even pregnant. I kind of like eased him into it. He's
Hmm.
pretty good about just being supportive of me. There
Hmm.
was never any pushback from him. He was just kind of like, okay, like that's okay. And then, I wasn't even pregnant at the time. So it was just kind of like a brief, like, hey, by the way, if we have another baby, like I'm gonna be free birthing. And I had kind of told him like during my pregnancies, with my first and my twins, I would just be like, these prenatal appointments are so pointless. Like I would just kind of tell him about them. I'm like, I'm literally in there for like 2 minutes. Hey, how are you feeling? I feel fine. Okay, let me know if you don't feel fine. Come back in a week or however, whenever. And I was like, I don't even need these. Like I remember saying that during my pregnancies to him. So he kind of already knew that I was, that things were just like, I just don't need to be going to all of this and doing all of that. And so when I did get pregnant, he's like, okay, so what are you doing? And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do, like I am still gonna do this. And so he would just check in during that pregnancy of like, this is still your plan, like this, okay, all right. And just kind of went with it. And I mean, that's the great thing about free birth and wild pregnancy. If at any point in time you're like, I kind of want someone else involved, you can just go. Like you can just go to an OB or you find a midwife, or you can have a completely wild pregnancy and choose to go and give birth at the hospital if like you get to that point and you're like, I just kind of need that, or I just kind of want that. So that was what I kind of explained to him too, was like, you're not my midwife. You're not my, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to be my midwife. You just need to be my husband and my support person and just,
Hmm.
support me through it. I will tell you, unless I like straight up just pass out and I'm unconscious, like you don't need to do anything. Like
Hmm.
I will tell you what I need. And if I feel that we need, some kind of intervention, like we'll do that. And you're just going to be my driver, basically. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So he was very on board, very supportive. And I was really thankful for that. Still am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great to hear. For that pregnancy, then, what kind of happened that started your labor for that one?
So it was all three of my single babies. Labor has started around the same time, the exact same way, and they've all been born around the same time. So always between 3 to 4 a.m. I wake up and I'll have a couple bowel movements and I will
Mm,
just clear out. I will not be hungry. Kind of starts as crampy. I kind of am wondering like, ooh, did I eat something bad? And then I'll, have my bowel movements. I'll go to lay down and then they'll gradually turn into contractions. And so that was
mm,
the same way with my first, my third pregnancy, and my most recent. And so, yeah, it just is always around that 3 or 4 a.m. And it like gradually will kind of turn into contractions, and I'll let him know, like, pretty sure I'm in labor. With my first free birth, he had he works far away. So even
mhm.
when like he'll work out of state a lot, and then if he is working in California, he still works like 2.5 hours away. So he had gotten up at 3 something to go to work, and he drives and gets all the way to work, and I wake up at 4 something with those bowel movements, and I kind of let him know, but I'm also like, I don't know, like I could have just eaten something bad, which is so funny because with my first free birth, I went to 42 weeks. Like I should have just known, like, hello,
Mm.
it's 42 weeks, like this is labor starting. But I think, with my twin birth, it was so different than with my single baby. I didn't really know if that was like the pattern that my body follows for labor.
Mhm.
And so I went, by the time I was like, okay, yeah, I think this is actually labor, he had gotten all the way to work. And I was like, you're gonna have to come back. And so he's like, yeah, she's in labor. So he had to drive all the way back. And yeah, I was just like, sorry, like I can't control it. It's just how it is. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's how that started. And yeah.
Mhm.
So he gets back home, I don't know, 8, maybe 7, 8. And that whole time, like they had kind of picked up and the contractions had kind of picked up and my kids were still sleeping, but I knew they were going to be waking up soon. So I, made them some breakfast. I'm kind of like stopping for the contractions, and I kind of start cleaning up. And I'm usually not hungry in labor. I really clear myself out and then I'm not hungry. So, it was just kind of like preparing like things for my kids so that I wouldn't have to do certain things like during active labor. And so, yeah, he got home before the kids woke up. And so they woke up and he kind of hung out with them while they made or ate breakfast. And I just kind of stayed with them. Like I just wanted to be where they were. I thought about going into my room, but things weren't too intense yet. And so we, eat breakfast, we turn a movie on for the kids. We're just kind of hanging out. And I had a little stall in labor. I remember I couldn't tell you the time of anything, but this was probably like it was sometime before lunchtime. So probably around 10. I have a stall in labor and I actually took a little nap, and my husband took a little, I mean, he was up early too. So the kids are watching a movie. He like dozed off. I really took a nap. And then I like woke up and I was like, oh, I haven't had contractions in a while because they were like
Mhm.
every 3 minutes apart. And then, so I'm like, okay, I need to get back up. Like, I do not want to stall this labor back out. Like, I want it to get going again. And so I get up and it kind of takes a minute for it to start again. And I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to be pregnant forever. Like, the labor's over, I guess. And I get in the shower at some point, and in the shower, I have a couple like almost pushy contractions. Like it wasn't fetal ejection reflex, but I just found or felt that like downward like push just a little bit.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't over. And so the contractions, they come back, they're more consistent again. And so I go into the room that I was planning on giving birth in, and I like being left alone during labor. I don't mind setting things up on my own. I just kind of wanted my husband to like take care of the kids so I didn't have to worry about them. So I go into that room, and I mean, contractions, like they're still manageable. I'm having to stop through them, but it wasn't like I hadn't hit transition or anything. So I set up my little, area on the ground and on the bed, and I just kind of hang out in the room in labor for a little bit, and things speed up. And I have a few more like kind of pushy contractions, and so I call my husband and I'm like, hey, like things are kind of, they're like speeding up a little bit, can you hang out in here with me? And so he did. The kids were still in the living room, and at this time we were actually living on in a house on my parents' property. So I didn't know what I wanted the kids to do. I wasn't opposed to having them there, but it's just kind of like when you're in the moment type of thing. And so things really speed up and get intense. And my twins come in and they were 18 months. And I'm on my hands and knees and they come in and they're moving the Chucks pads all around. They're like pulling on me. And I look at my husband, I'm like, you got to get them out. Like, you got to get them. And so he calls my mom. She's right, next door in the other house. And so she comes and takes my twins. My son was, gosh, he wasn't even, was he 2? I don't remember how old he was, but he was in the living room watching a movie still. And he just stayed there the whole time watching a movie. And so she takes them, and I get to the point where like it's getting, I'm having to vocalize through them. And even my husband's just sitting there. He's just watching, just, waiting for me to like tell him what I want him to do. And I'm on my knees on the ground and I have like my upper body on the bed. It was kind of a shorter bed frame. And that was like it was so comfortable. And so they get intense and I end up in a lunge at some point. I don't remember getting in. I end up in a lunge, and fetal ejection reflex like kicks in. And I had only had one ultrasound at the beginning of the pregnancy just to confirm that it wasn't twins again,
Yeah.
because I was just nervous about that. I still would have free birth, but I was just nervous about having twins again. So I hadn't had any like later on in the pregnancy. I didn't know baby's position. I wasn't really great with that pregnancy about feeling like where baby, palpating and kind of feeling where baby was. Like with my last pregnancy, I was really able to like actually feel him and like kind of take note of where his position was. So I didn't know like what her position was. And my water never broke at it. So this is a part for me. My water never broke, but when she came out, she was not in a sack.
Mm.
So, and then when her full body, so I think that, it maybe was just like around her head or something, because then when she did fully come out, then it did like all release. But yeah, I just remembered that. I was like, when did this happen? Like I never had any leaking waters.
Yeah.
But yeah, so fetal ejection reflex kicks in and I'm pushing her head out. And with my other pregnancy, my other babies, my other births, I never felt them come like reach down with my hand to feel them coming out. So I did not realize how soft and squishy a baby's head is when their head is coming out. And I was, I had my hand down there because I kind of wanted to, guide her head out, not just let her like come flying out. And I'm like feeling her head and I was like, oh my gosh, is that her butt? Like I asked my husband, I'm like, is that her butt or is that her head? And he like looked down. He's like, I think it's her head. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I having a breech, babe? Like, not that I was concerned about it, but I was just like, man, is like, am I having a breech baby? And so I wasn't. Her head came out and I'm like, okay, that has to be your head, right? He's like, yeah, that's her head. Her head's out. And just guide her out, lift her up, bring her up to my chest, and just kind of hold her for a minute. I don't remember, every little detail. To me, it felt like she cried right away. To my husband, he said it felt like forever until she took her first cry. So, I think that took her probably a minute or so to really, fully just transition into being in the world. But I just knew that she was okay. I'm looking at her and she opened her eyes, she's stretching her arms out, like she's moving, she's there. She just didn't cry for a minute at first. And my husband afterwards, he's like, man, that felt like forever until she, first cried. But, that was really not special that he never like, even if that did make him nervous, he never was like, oh, is she okay? Like, is it didn't pull me out of that space. Like, I just was talking to her. I knew she was okay. And he just, if he was worried, he kept it to himself, which I was very thankful for that, because I think that it probably would have pulled me out of that, birth high, and maybe worried me a little bit, but I just knew like she was okay. And he helped me up into the bed. I have really short umbilical cords, so it makes moving and getting my babies to latch really hard. But so my placenta was still in me and he helps me up on the bed. And I was just kind of like, man, I want this placenta out of me. Like I don't know how long it had been, but So I just kind of like felt down to the cord and I could feel my placenta right there. So I just gave the cord like the slightest little pull. I never want to encourage anyone to like, pull on their
Yeah.
cord, but I could feel the placenta right there. So I just kind of, pushed and like just gently pulled and it just came right out and we put it in a bowl and I don't know how long we left her connected to it. I didn't keep track of any of that. I just knew it was not pulsing anymore. And so, we cut that at some point. She latched right away, had, great breastfeeding beginning. And yeah, that was, I was just left like, okay, that was birth. Like, just any other normal day. Like, I mean, of
Mhm.
course it's amazing because you're bringing in your child, but it was just like, okay, like that was birth. All right. Like
Mhm.
time to move on, and then I, rinsed off at some point because I just had it all over me and got into so the room that I gave birth in wasn't my bedroom because my kids still slept in my bedroom. So I just planned to
Mhm.
birth in the guest room so that if I didn't know what time of day or anything was going to happen. So moved into my bedroom, into my bed, and spent the rest of the postpartum period just hanging out and loving on this new baby. And yeah, that was
Yeah.
my rebirth. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so sweet. I love how you talked about the crying afterwards because
Hmm.
I feel like that is something that is so kind of normalized in our society today of like the baby has to cry as soon as they come out. And if there's no crying, it's like everyone is freaking out, everyone's panicking, it's like an emergency. And really, that's not the case. With so many home births, the babies take a little bit to cry.
Hmm.
And it's because no one is rubbing on them vigorously and like
Hmm.
spanking their butt or like patting their back super hard.
Holding them upside down, like.
Yes, like all of those crazy interventions that they do in the hospital just to hear that cry because they are
Mhm.
so worried about getting sued, basically, that they have to make sure the baby's alive as soon as they come out. And it's just, it doesn't give the baby like even a minute to just be like, okay, that happened. They
Mhm.
just right away are feeling all of this new like sensations and being messed with. And so obviously they're going to scream and cry.
Especially free birth, right? You can have great midwives, but
Hmm.
especially free birth, you're going to have the most just untouched
Yeah.
birth. And it is so peaceful. Like these babies are being born peacefully. They're not
Hmm.
being born violently. They almost don't have the need to like be screaming. Even
Yeah.
with, my second free birth, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, like it was the same thing. He was not just screaming when he
Hmm.
came out. And they're just born so peacefully like and I felt this peace of just looking into their faces and just this like we're here, like we are okay, it just like almost like a thank you,
Hmm.
like you're like the baby looking at me like, oh, thank you for like allowing me to be born this way. Like I don't know, that might sound a little crazy, but it just is
No.
this really special moment of like they're just peaceful. It's just, I would just describe it as peaceful.
Hmm.
Very, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's great that you put that in there too, the mention of sometimes midwives can even be an intervention for that too, depending on what kind of midwife you hire. If you do have a midwife who was used to the hospital system and started out
Mhm.
there and then ended up going into home birth, they could bring those same policies and guidelines into the home. So it is really important to vet your midwife if you are going to have one and let them know like, hey, I don't want anyone touching the baby after baby's born. I only want to touch the baby. Like, I want to give baby a minute to cry. Like, we're going to wait just a little bit and make sure everything's fine. And just have those talks with
Mhm.
midwives if you are choosing to have a midwife in your space. But like you said, with free birth, it happens almost every single time, unless there's some emergency. Then usually it's like a nice, peaceful minute, like you said,
Mhm.
until baby actually will start crying.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's a different cry, with
Hmm.
my little burst, like it is like a scream. It's this like
Yeah.
just very like loud. With my free birth babies, it was just this like, okay, I'm crying to work my lungs and to get in those
Hmm.
deep breaths. Like it wasn't this like, painful, like just uncomfortable cry. In the hospital, like they seemed uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
in home, it was just this like, I'm just crying because like I'm supposed to, this is a part
Hmm.
of the birth process. I'm supposed to get in those first cries. I'm not saying like not let your baby cry. You don't want your baby to cry. You told, of course you do, but it can just take them a minute to just come to it of like, okay, I was born in this beautiful, peaceful way, and I'm gonna cry when I'm ready. I'm
Hmm.
gonna take the first breath when I'm ready, and I mean they're still connected to the placenta. They're still getting their oxygen and
Hmm.
their blood and everything. Like they can take a minute. It's
Hmm.
okay. They'll come. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I love that you touched on that. And so for your most recent pregnancy, that was obviously probably like an already automatic, I'm having a free birth with that one too, because the past one was just so amazing as I hear. And so was there anything that you did differently for this one before it? Was there anything that you kind of changed because you had now experienced one free birth?
No, I wasn't as on top of like listening to birth stories anymore because I was a little bit like, oh, I've done it. Like I'm not that I just, I kind of got busy. And, with
Mm-hmm.
my first free birth, like I really was like, okay, I need to hear this. Like I need
Yeah.
to educate myself on these things. And so with my next, I was kind of like, okay, I've been through it. I still, remember a lot of things. And so before getting pregnant with him, I just, kind of backed off on that. I wasn't quite in like the birth space anymore. Like I had just gone through it. And so then when I did get pregnant with him, I kind of tried listening to stories a little bit more. It just kind of gets me in like a zone of like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what I'm doing. Like this is a stage that I'm in of looking forward to birth and everything. And before getting pregnant with him, I had two miscarriages. So going into pregnancy with him, I was feeling a lot of anxiety already. Like
Hmm.
you'd think that because it was my second free birth, I would be like even more confident, but I
Hmm.
had a lot of anxiety with his pregnancy. At first it was, the miscarriages. Was I going to lose this baby too? And
Hmm.
then it was when I'm pregnant with boys, I have found out I feel like crap. Like I don't feel good. I feel out of it. I feel really tired. And my first child, it was a boy, and I had no other kids to take care of. I could take as many naps as I wanted during the day. So I wasn't really clicking with like, I was feeling horrible. Plus, it was my first pregnancy. I just didn't know like exactly how I would handle pregnancy. And then with my twins and my first free birth, they were all girls. And I felt
Hmm.
so good. And so then getting pregnant with my last baby, he was a boy. And I felt like crap the entire pregnancy. I knew he was a boy because of how bad I felt. And getting to the third trimester, I started experiencing like vision auras that were followed by a migraine. And I had had a wild pregnancy again. So then I, got all this anxiety that am I, getting on, like, am I starting to get the beginning of preeclampsia? Like I started
Hmm.
getting really worried about that. And so I actually went to labor and delivery 3 times during that third trimester because I had those auras and migraines, and the vision part was what really like threw me off. And I, because I've had migraines before and I get pretty bad headaches when I am pregnant, but this was just different and it made me really nervous. And so, every time I went in, they, would do like the urine test and everything. And I was fine. I didn't have it and I didn't have high blood pressure or anything, but I just was like, what is going on? And so the third time I went in, they were able to put it together that, okay, this is a vision aura with like following or leading up to a migraine. And
Hmm.
so, but just with experiencing those weird things, like I felt a lot of anxiety and just was not as confident going
Hmm.
into this free birth. And I would even like try and listen to free birth stories, and it just wasn't, getting me in that zone like it with my first free birth did. And then my husband at 33 weeks, he had to work 5 hours away. and I didn't know when, like, how long I was going to last for. And I mean, I knew that if I made it to like 40 weeks, that I would ask him to just like stay home from work, because then you obviously know within the next like 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to be having a baby. But when, you're 33 to 38 weeks, like it could be, the next day, or it could be another 6 weeks. Like you never know, like exactly. That's such a big time frame in
Yeah.
those beginning 30 weeks. And so he was working 5 hours away, and I actually ended up getting in touch with a midwife in my area, because I got to 36 weeks, and then got to 37 weeks, and then was coming up on 38 weeks, and I'm like, okay, like really I could have a baby at any time. And as much as I love free birth, I wasn't up for doing a completely solo free birth. Like I wanted
Yeah.
someone there. And I'm also not like, I've never had my mom any of my births. I'm not one to like welcome people into my births, even in the hospital. I have a little bit of a different mindset with like actual birth workers, because I'm like, okay, that's what they do for work. Like they see
Hmm.
all these different things. But for whatever reason with family, I am just a little bit more like, yeah, I don't really want you there. I don't want you listening to me. I don't want to feel like you're waiting on me. Like I just want to be left alone.
Hmm.
And so I got in touch with a midwife in our area, and she's totally supportive of free birth. She's really great. Like if I was to ever want to have a midwife, it would be her. Like she was really great. And so I'm Christian, and so this to me is all God's timing. Like there is, in like the way that this birth planned out. And so something that I would pray for during my pregnancy, though, was for my birth to just happen the way that my heart was desiring it, because in my head I'm filled with anxiety. I'm like, even considering like having a hospital birth, like if my husband is away and I go into labor, I'm like, well, I'm just going to go to the hospital. Like that was how much anxiety I was filled with, and
Mm.
just like fear. And so I just would pray that like my birth would go how my heart was wanting, because I knew in my heart I wanted that undisturbed birth again. I wanted that free birth again, but my head was just not in that right space for a while. So 38 weeks and one day, I'm like, because I went to 42 weeks of my first free birth, I was like, I'm going to go to 42 weeks again, like at least past 40, like I'm going to have a mid-October baby. Nope, 38 weeks in one day. It was September 18th, which is my sister's birthday. It was
Mm.
the day that my husband's last day of work from 5 hours away, that he was coming home, and the day that that midwife was coming over for the first time. I wake
Oh,
up at
wow.
4 in the morning, bowel movements, cramping, and I was like, no way. Like this would be way too perfect of timing. Like no way I'm going to go into labor today. My sister's birthday, my husband's coming home, this midwife is coming over for the first time. Like no way. And bowel movements, go and lay down, and start cramping, start contracting. And I was like, no, like no way. And so I knew that my husband was going to be up at like 5:30. So I just kind of gave it till then. I'm like, okay, if I'm still, because this was like 4 maybe in the morning. And so I'm like, okay, if I'm still contracting consistently by 5:30, I'm going to let him know and ask him if he can just come home, because he had like half a day of work still, and then he was going to be coming home
Mm.
after that, and he had a 5 hour drive. And so 5:30 comes, he's awake, and I'm like, hey, like I'm pretty sure I'm in early labor, can you come home early? And he's like, okay, yeah, let me go, talk to whatever. And I think that he left there at like 8 in the morning, and the kids are all asleep, and like 6 something comes around, and I let my mother-in-law know, because I knew that the midwives were coming over. So I was like, if I'm gonna go into labor, like, and actually have this baby before my husband gets here, I didn't want my kids here with just the midwife. So I asked my mother-in-law to come and get the kids and bring them to her house just in case, and kind of told her what was going on. And so the kids wake up at like, I don't know, 7 something. And as soon as they woke up, I was having like 3 to 5 minute apart contractions. I was having to breathe through, to then like 10 minutes apart. And,
Mm.
like they kind of spaced out. And then my mother in law got here, and they were like 20 to 30 minutes apart. Like they just completely spaced out. And then, so she's like, okay, well, she said that she'll just hang out until the midwife got here, which I think was around noon. The midwife was going to be here, and
Mm.
that way I wasn't completely alone, just in case. I
Yeah.
didn't want to give birth completely alone. And so the midwife gets to the house at, I don't know, noon around then. And so that those, 3 hours before her getting there, the contractions were still like 20 to 30 minutes apart. Like they were very spaced out. Labor had definitely stalled. And then the midwife gets there and we're talking, we're kind of getting to know each other, kind of going over how kind of she goes about birth with her clients and everything, and they're still spaced out. But I had told her, I was like, I don't know if this is the beginning of labor. It's really stalled out now that like everyone has been here, so it could be in a couple days. And so she asked, she's like, well, she knew that my husband was on his way home. She's like, so if your husband's on his way home, like, do you even want us? Like, do you? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I just kind of was like, I don't know. Like maybe I still like it was in my head about like the fear. So like part of me was like, yes, I want someone else
Mhm.
there to like tell me that I'm okay. But like again, like I internally I knew like I did not want anyone else there. And so I just said, I don't know. I'll just kind of let you know. Like if this speeds up when my husband gets here and I end up wanting you, like I'll let you know. She's like, okay, yeah, sounds good. But I mean, she was so great. Like she is so supportive of free birth and everything. And yeah, so they were probably over an hour. They leave, and my husband is like 20 minutes from home at this point. And I go, and my mother-in-law had taken my other kids to her house. So I'm completely alone. I'm like, I'm gonna go lay down. I'm gonna get some rest. I've been up since like three something for contracting. And so I go and lay down, and 5 minutes after laying down, like they are on top of contractions, like back on top of each other, so intense, so strong. And I still was just in this disbelief of like, no, this is too perfect of timing. Like, I am not having a baby today. There is no way. Like, this labor is just
Mhm.
gonna stall back out again. Like, maybe I'll have a baby tomorrow. Like, maybe I just need one more night of like laboring. I was just in disbelief that I was gonna be having a baby. And my husband gets home and I'm like totally laboring. Like I look back now, I'm like, I was in full like active labor. I was laboring, but I'm just like he asked me, he's like, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm okay. I just like, I don't know. Like I don't I don't know if baby's coming today. Like and so like I get in the shower at some point, and our shower is really small. So I'm kind of like leaning in the corner with the water running on my back in between each contraction. And my head is like leaning on the corner, and it's like a metal piece. And the next day, my forehead was sore from like where I was leaning in the shower. But at some point, like in the shower, I had to like get on my hands and knees to get through contractions and let the water run on me. And so I stayed in the shower until the water ran cold and went back to my room. And I could not find a comfortable position this labor. I
Mhm.
really couldn't. Like my my first pregnancy, my first labor, I would consider painful. It was
Mhm.
definitely painful. The twins was literally so fast. Like I know we didn't really touch on those, but the twins were both born 15 minutes after I got to the hospital, and my husband missed the birth because it was so fast. Like
Wow.
zero pain with that labor. My first rebirth, not necessarily painful, but definitely intense. This time, like it was hard. It was so hard. I could not find a comfortable position. Like these contractions were so intense. I would say painful. Like in the moment, I try and gaslight myself and say they're not painful. I'm like, no, they're just intense. They're just intense. But like now that I'm out of it, I'm like, no, those were freaking painful.
Yeah.
And so I'm like I finally get to this position of leaning on my knees again, leaning on my yoga ball, and just moving that way, like trying to get through each of these contractions. And like I told my husband at so many points, like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this is so hard. Like, I even had a thought in my head of like, let's just go to the hospital. Like, let's just go to the hospital. Let's get that epidural. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And like, I would, say to him, like, this is so hard. This is so hard. I just want him out already. I want this over. Like I was not, with my first rebirth, like it was almost enjoyable. Like it was hard, it was intense, but it was just, I don't know. I don't know if that's that little bit of fear that was still in my head that just was there and present in that labor that just made it that much harder. But finally, I have a couple again, like pushy contractions, not full on, the reflex, but kind of pushy. And I feel him kind of wiggle and get down. And like, okay, like maybe I am actually having a baby today. Like this is when it like clicked. I'm like, okay, maybe I am having a baby today. And I have like one really, really strong contraction. And I had my hand down there and my water just burst all over my hand.
Mhm.
And after that happened, I'm like, okay, I am having a baby today. Like, all right. And I feel him just like fall into position even more and have a couple of, fetal ejection reflex kicking in. I feel his squishy head again. This time I knew he was head down because he had hiccups all the time during my pregnancy. So
Mhm.
I could feel his head down there having the hiccups
Mhm.
and, guide his head out again. And during my last free birth, also, once my baby's heads are out, I kind of take a breath. Like I kind of take a pause and fetal ejection reflex almost kind of stops and it kind of becomes more of me to get. I mean, maybe if I just sat there and waited, it would probably happen again. But I remember with my first free birth, when her head was out, I was not uncomfortable. When Matthew, his head came out, I was uncomfortable. Like I was like, this
Mhm.
hurts, get this baby out of me. And so I took a breath. I kind of looked at my husband, take a breath, and I just pushed him the rest of the way
Mhm.
out because it just was uncomfortable. Like I don't know what it was, but it was hard. And so yeah, birth him, pull him up. And again, he just takes a minute, just looking at each other, and he just takes a minute to really cry. And I think that I was kind of more aware of it this time because my husband had, after my first free birth, made that comment of like it felt like forever for her to take that breath. And so I think this time I was a little bit more aware of like the time because it not in like a panicky way felt like it took a minute, but I did kind of notice that it was like, okay, yeah, he is taking like his time to take that breath. And so my husband took pictures when he was born. And then I have a picture of the placenta right after the placenta was born. And I pull him up to my chest and I sit back and my placenta is like right there. I feel a cramp and my placenta just comes out. I was like, oh, okay. Like, and it was like a picture of him. And then 3 minutes later, a picture of my placenta. Because, when
Mm.
you're in that birth space, you're like, did time really go by that fast? Was it longer than I was thinking? But so actually having like the visual timestamps of, no, like it really came out right after. And I didn't pull
Yeah.
on the cord. I just, had a cramp and just pushed and pushed it out. And same thing, short cord, really, really hard to move, really hard to even get him up to my breast. And so I just kind of sat there for, I don't know how long I sat there, but on the ground until I felt that the cord was like, done pulsing enough because I couldn't move. Like my butt was starting to go numb because I was sitting there like I couldn't get him up to my breast. I could feel him kind of starting to get cold. I'm like, I need to get in bed. And I just, with how short my cords are, like my husband can't even hold him to get up. And so,
Mhm.
I had like had this which I guess the placenta was out of me, but still, like moving a bowl and a baby, like it just was really hard. My cords were just really short, so I would see it like pulling on his belly button and stuff, and I was just like, yeah, I don't like that. And so I could have left him connected to the cord a little bit longer probably, but it wasn't pulsing. It was pretty white. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, I just need to get in bed. Like I need to get covered up with a blanket. We need to just get in bed. I can't breastfeed. Like he's like trying to latch and I like cannot pull him up to me. And so we end up cutting the cord, getting into bed and breastfeed. And I go rinse off again at some point. And my husband cleans up while I'm rinsing off and I get into bed and he came home that day from work and he was only supposed to be home for a couple of days, but it ended up he was home for a couple of weeks. Like they
Mm.
didn't have work for a couple of weeks. So like that was another like time because that was another thing that I would pray for my whole pregnancy was like to really put a focus on postpartum. I had even with
Yeah.
my first rebirth, I didn't put this huge focus on postpartum. And so this time around, that was a goal of like having a very calm and just like staying in bed postpartum. Like I had never really done that. And so that was another thing that I was just like, that is such God's timing. Like my
Mm.
husband was only supposed to be home for like 2 days. Well, and he would have taken time off of work, but like he didn't even have to take time off of work. He had those couple of weeks off
Mm.
that it just worked out that I could just stay in bed and he could take care of the other kids and yeah, and just kind of, make me food and it was really nice. It was a really nice postpartum this time around also. And yeah, so my mother-in-law had the older kids. And so in total, my like active, strong labor was like 2 hours. But I had been, so he was born at like 3 or 4 something. I don't remember the time right now. But, and then I started laboring around that like 3 or 4 a.m. So it was kind of like a 12-hour process, but like actual active labor was just like the 2 hours because it was like 2 hours after my husband got home. And that's when like it really
Mhm.
picked up was like right before he got home. And so my mother-in-law had the kids at her house, and so we're like, oh, can you bring them back over so they can meet their little brother? And they come over, they meet him, and I'm very okay with family, like my family and my husband's parents and stuff coming to meet the grandbabies right away. Like I'm okay with that. And so I don't remember if I had my family come over that day or the day after, but my mother-in-law came over with the kids, and she was like, do you want the kids to stay here with you guys? Do you want me to bring them back home and just give my husband and I and this baby this night? And so we did. We had her just take the kids back home with her so that we could just have those that first night together, just focusing on Matthew and just being together. And that was really really special and really nice. So yeah, another like just almost boring birth. Like it just is like boring in a good way, right? Like
Mhm.
I can only hope and pray for future boring births. But yeah, that was my second one. And yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like they were very similar, but also there was so many like tiny little differences, which were really
Mhm.
cool. I really do like that you touched on the like anxiety and like your mindset during that time, because I actually really like to focus on women's mindset before going into birth. I think it is a really like important part of birth prep that is often overlooked. It's very similar to like the postpartum phase. Like people will only focus on prepping for birth, but not for postpartum. And I think it's
Mhm.
the same case for your mindset. Like people will
Sure.
focus on just the education and hearing stories and knowing stats and knowing like the risks of everything, informed consent, all of those things are really big right now for you to prep for your birth. And even
Mhm.
like labor coping techniques and positions, everything that's more like physical and logistical is super like pushed right now. But the thing that isn't being pushed is your mindset before going into birth and like what are your thoughts surrounding your birth? What anxieties are you having? What fears are you having? What keeps coming up for you and kind of attacking those before the birth? Because, like you said, that will come up during your labor. You will feel some fear, you will feel that anxiety coming up. And it's really important just to kind of prepare for that. And obviously, we do the best that we can when we're in situations. Like if we don't know how to prep for that, or we don't even know that there is prep for that, like we maybe don't have those resources. And so it is unfortunate that some people will go into their birth with a certain mindset and then their birth won't go the way that they
Mhm.
wanted because of that. So I just appreciate you for saying that like you did have those anxieties, you did have those fears, even though that you had a previous free birth and everything went perfectly fine. It's not like you went into your next one like, okay, I can do this. I'm completely
Mhm.
confident. Like, no, there's still anxieties, there's still fears, things happen. Unfortunately, you had your miscarriages that also carried over those anxieties. And it's like, I just want to make a point that it is important to prepare your mindset before going into birth. And I just think it's really interesting how it kind of played a part in your birth, but it's also great that
Mhm.
it didn't hinder anything. Like you still,
Mhm.
like you said, got the birth that you wanted, even though you were inviting a possible midwife to maybe be there. You were thinking about possibly having a hospital birth and just going there. It's amazing that you were still able to have the free birth that you really wanted. And like you said, that your heart desired.
Mhm. Yeah. No, yeah, and I almost think that I needed more of that mental work during that pregnancy than I did with my first free birth. I think with my first free birth, like I was just eager and excited to feel birth that way. Like I had kind of
Mhm.
felt it a little bit with my twins, that I was excited and eager to like really fully fear it or feel it. Whereas like with my next free birth, I almost like it was almost like my first free birth was too good of like,
Mhm.
like what if like that, like what if I really did just get lucky? Like what if I think social media plays a part in it too. And I really tried to back off of social media during that pregnancy because I would get the comments of like, oh, you just got lucky, like next
Mhm.
time your baby's gonna die or whatever. And so I almost like was almost in my head too of like, what if these people are right? Like, what
Yeah.
if I really did just get lucky? Like, what if that was just my one good one? And now I'm gonna go and have this next free birth and then everything's gonna go wrong. And like I'm gonna have to
Mhm.
tell these people that they were right. Like that's like that I think that like I'm kind of just realizing right now, like that was almost like a big part of it. Like it started out my first trimester of just fearing that I was going to lose the baby and then get to the point of like, okay, no, I'm not losing the baby. I'm continuing with this pregnancy. Like baby's growing, everything's good. Okay, now I really am going to have to give birth. Like
Mhm.
and what if they're right? What if I was just lucky that one time? But like, like deep down, I knew because when I would get out of that anxiety state, like I would be in a state of peace and like, no, like
Mhm.
everything's gonna be okay. This is, again, I am Christian. So this, I believe like this is the way that God intended birth to be. Like we're supposed to feel birth this way, that it leaves us wanting more and wanting to give birth again and feeling that high. And, like this is the way that I really felt that I was supposed to birth, but then I would get in my head and I couldn't really pinpoint it because I was aware of that because that was kind of, with learning about free birth, I did learn about that mental side of like you got to kind of get through that during pregnancy. Like your pregnancy is the time to get through that and work on that and prepare so that when you do go into birth, like you're good for the most part. And I just think that I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, exactly why I was feeling that fear and why I was having that anxiety. I think it was just kind of a mix of everything and my husband working away and not having this like set plan of like, yes, I am free birthing and like, well, maybe I am going to the hospital. Maybe I am having a midwife. I want free birth, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Like everything, nothing felt like set in stone as much. Like it was a little bit up in the air until that last minute.
Mhm.
And then, like, I think that I was kind of trying to find this place of feeling absolutely no fear. But I think that even you can work on yourself and you can, get to these places. You might always just have a little bit of fear, right? There is
Mhm.
always a little bit of what if. And I think that, when you give birth in a hospital or you have a midwife, you kind of put your faith in them, right? So even
Mhm.
though you might feel that fear or have that fear in the back of your head a little bit, it's almost like you have this safety net of people. Well, they're
Mhm.
gonna say they're gonna keep me safe. Like it's all gonna be, I just need to push that fear to the back of my head. Whereas like free birth, it's just is a little bit more present, a little bit more of
Mhm.
like you don't have those other people to like put your faith and your trust into. And for me,
Yeah.
thankfully, I do have God, I do have my religion and everything, but it just with hospital and midwives, you can have this false sense of safety and security. Whereas
Yeah.
free birth, it's like, it's just this more present and like, okay, like sometimes things do happen. And it's, so I think it is, do as much work on yourself mentally as you can, because it is going to show up during your labor. And sometimes it can show up in really, not good ways. You can have your cervical lip that just doesn't release, or you can have certain things that just like hinder your labor because you have that fear that you haven't let go of.
Mhm.
And thankfully, I didn't have that. Mine was just, I think it was just more painful and more like, I don't really want to do this, but I have to get this baby out.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think, do as much work as you can. It is so important, but it also is okay if you don't get to a place of like, okay, no fears in the world, whatever happens, happens. Like you might always have just that little bit. And it's okay to stay like aware of that, I think, too.
Mhm.
And I was just kind of like, I don't want to feel any of that at all. Like I wasn't accepting that little bit of fear of like, okay, it is going to be there. But yeah, it was just interesting to me that, you'd think that after having a free birth, I would be
Mhm.
much more confident and like, okay, let's do it again. But I was like, okay, is birth really that easy? Like this isn't,
Mhm.
where's the catch here? Like this
Yeah.
is really how it is. And yeah, so I mean, hopefully it's I'm a little bit more confident if we have another. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was a lot of great wisdom for so many women to be able to hear that. That was awesome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this. This is so fun. I love this.
Yeah, me too. For anyone who wants to either find you on social media or like see more pictures of like your births, because I know you shared them,
Mhm.
where can they find you?
I'm mostly on Instagram, the dot milk protector. I think it's the same for TikTok also, but I am more active on Instagram. And yeah,
Okay.
I share kind of bits of everything on there.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and leave the link down below so anyone who wants to follow you and see more of your story and your family can go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing all of your stories with us.
Yeah, thank you.
As a doula and birth keeper, I serve women who want to have a physiological and intuitive birth. Women who are ready to take radical responsibility for their birth and want to be the authority in their birth. This is not a job or career for me. This is much bigger, something deeper. This is soul work, my ultimate passion, because I trust women and I trust birth. I have both in-person and virtual offerings available, including birth services, birth circles, courses, mentorships, freebies, and much more. For more information on everything that I offer, the link is down below in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd love for you to share with any family or friends who may benefit from these stories and experiences. To further support this podcast, I'd appreciate if you would leave a 5-star rating and review, or you can even make a loving donation on my website at birthsathome.com/products/podcast-donation. Tune in next week for another home birth story.